Engineering gameplay in Star Citizen has recently gone through a series of tech previews, including through Wave 1, which actually allows people to show content of it. But it's really set the community ablaze once again on the fundamental question of what it means to be a solo player, especially with a solo player attempting to target a larger ship. Let's jump in and do a deep dive analysis on exactly what this will look like once engineering is released later this year. So even though I'm actually part of Wave 1 and I could have theoretically tested engineering, I unfortunately wasn't able to actually load it. That's what the state of the game was in the tech preview, especially the latest tech preview. Now, I'm, like most other people, incredibly nervous on what this is going to mean when they attempt to release it in less than a month's time. But, I mean, who knows? We'll just have to see exactly what it means. Now, in the 2+ years that I've been playing this game, it is kind of almost tradition that CIG releases a very buggy release right before Christmas and then goes on holidays. But I'm honestly kind of expecting the same thing this year. Why should it be any different? Even though it's the year of playability, it really wouldn't feel like Christmas if I couldn't get into Star Citizen. But that's really the future's problem. So the question really is, what is it going to be like to be a solo pilot in Star Citizen once the new engineering gameplay is released? Now, I know that there's a lot of comments out there about people being whales and wanting to fly capital ships, etc., etc. I mean, my only rebuttal to that is you have to keep in mind that CIG purposefully markets being that pilot of the Polaris that's commanding your entire NPC crew. They really kind of, honestly, they sell these large ships to individuals. So to me, it's not unreasonable that the individual would like to fly it and use it. Now, yes, I personally fly around my Polaris all the time, so I'm probably in that boat of people that want to be able to fly capital ships themselves. Solo, that is. But I'm under zero illusion that I should be able to enter combat in my capital ship by myself. I really do think that it should be limited. Now, the reason that I mention all of this is it's important for you to understand where I come from when I'm actually talking about what I'm talking about here, because I am naturally biased. I'll admit it. That's just the way it is. So even though I couldn't partake in the tech preview personally, I have gone through every single minute of video footage that I could find on other creators who did manage to actually join the tech previews, all of the different variants of it, and everything that they had to say about it. So I'm not just rambling here. I mean, this is a slightly educated guess of what it'll look like. But the reality is, with still a month to go, or a month plus to go, engineering is probably going to look very different than the tech previews anyway. And I can only imagine it's one of those things that'll be extensively tweaked, even after it's live. So I'm not really overly concerned that I'm that far off here. Let's start the conversation with that small, single-seater, no interior ship. That's kind of the class of ship for this first section. And I do see that there will be some key differences, but I actually don't see a lot of change to the way that people play the game today. The one minor impact that I do see is you are going to have to perform maintenance on your components. So as you're flying around the verse, you are going to have to repair them from time to time and potentially even replace them. Now, these are typically size 1 components, very small. They're actually not all that expensive, so it's not really that concerning to me personally. Now, you do have the aspect of power management as well. As you're flying around, setting presets and setting your power is going to be even more difficult than it is today. And I say that because I do know a lot of people who play and they just don't really understand the power management aspect of it. And I can absolutely sympathize with that, because as you're jumping into the game, especially if you don't spend a lot of time in the game, it's complicating to understand why your quantum drive doesn't work. And you have to go through all of these checks to make sure it's on, basically. Now, that is going to get a lot more complicating with engineering, because now you have to worry about things like the temperature that each component throws off as well, and making sure that your cooler can actually handle it, in addition to having the power, being able to power those components. Other than that, generally I don't see a big difference with the introduction of engineering for those ships without an interior, those single-seater ships like the F-8C Lightning, for instance. The one big area that I do see is when you start to talk about combat. Because the intention is to keep ships around and keep the time to kill a ship higher, your ships will no longer just kind of randomly explode. Now, what that means is that your individual target or your individual components will be targeted and they will start to fail, but your ship really will become disabled. At that point, you'll have the ability to call for help, get somebody to throw in a new power plant, and you can kind of move along on your way. This, I think, is a very welcome change, but at the same time, without having an interior to store spare components, it doesn't really help you, because most players are just going to backspace until that becomes a lot more expensive and a lot more difficult. Now, that's really the only real impacts that I see for those single-seater ships that don't have an interior. Where the differences really start to come in is as you start to talk about ships that have the interiors. So let's jump into the mid-size category, shall we? Now, in this middle category, I'm including everything that has an interior but is still intended to be flown by a single pilot. So that to me is everything from like a cutter all the way up to maybe an Asgard or something, maybe even a little bigger than that. Now, these kind of border on that multi-crew required in a lot of cases, like if you talk about the Taurus, for instance, but they're still normally very easily handled by a solo player today. This is where I think you'll see the mass majority of the change as a solo player. Because in these ships, you are actually going to have to manage your components, but the components aren't necessarily in dedicated engineering rooms and things like that. So it's actually going to be a little bit trickier to me than in a large capital ship, for instance. So again, in your day-to-day, I don't actually see a big difference outside of combat, of course. As long as you're regularly maintaining your components and you're actually doing maintenance to them, I don't see this being a big problem. Your ship will fly around for, 10, 20, 30 hours without having to replace components. And it's really just a money sink to go and replace the components from time to time. Now, these ships, it's actually a little bit nicer to me because you'll have the capability to store spare components in the cargo bays that they have. That'll be incredibly helpful. Unlike a single-seater ship that doesn't have the interior, you can store a spare cooler in and swap it out on the go. You don't necessarily have to worry about it when you hop in to do some flying. Now, where the major difference is going to be with these ships is fire and fire management. As the components degrade and as the components overheat, they can start on fire. Now, because you have a ship interior, you actually have to really care about the fire because the fire will spread and damage other components and ultimately disable your ship. But in this size of a ship, you can't necessarily just open the cargo bay, put out the fire, and vent the airlock, if you will. In some ships, that will absolutely be possible, but in other ships, the components will be hosted directly behind you. Now, unless you're wearing a suit that actually has air in it, taking out the climate within the area that you're actually in probably isn't a great idea. So I do believe that from time to time you are going to have to stop and you are going to have to put out the fires using a fire extinguisher. Again, being that this isn't the super large ships, I don't see this as being a huge problem, because it really doesn't take that much to run end to end of a Taurus, for instance. But I do see people taking it into consideration when they purchase ships, because you're going to want to be able to move to those components very quickly. And I, for one, am probably going to favor ships that have the components in the cargo area, like the Asgard largely, because it'll allow me to open the doors, vent the atmosphere, put out the fire, and then go do any repairs that I need to. That'll mean getting back into the flying state a lot faster than a ship that I have to run to the other end and use a fire extinguisher for. Now, let's talk about combat. And I do separate out combat here in all three categories, actually, because I do think that it's going to make combat in a ship like the Taurus substantially more difficult. The Taurus is really meant to be a ship that's piloted by a small crew, but it is still solo capable. Today, there's really no reason to actually use a crew with a Taurus. It doesn't really make sense other than the extra gunner. But in the future, I do think that it'll be incredibly important to have that extra person that can manage the ship when you're in combat, that can run to the back, that can put out the fires as people are targeting your power plant, for instance, in addition to having that extra gunner. And personally, I would actually probably take the engineer over the gunner. That's how important I think it'll actually be. Now, that's really going to depend on the ship, because if you take like a C1, for instance, probably not super important. Take a Taurus, and I can see it being more important. So again, it's really going to depend on the ship. And that's why I say personally, I'm probably going to shift a lot of my fleet being those ships that are easier to maintain and fly, even during combat, solo. Even the same size and class of ship. I think it's going to make a lot more difference. The other thing to consider is you're going to have to manage your power a lot better, especially in combat situations where you want to give a lot more power to the guns. Now, these are ships where it's really going to get into the state that the power plant that you have is really going to dictate what you can actually do. So it's going to be very important to have top-of-the-line power plants, because that's going to allow you to power the guns at the same time as the shields, at the same time as the climate, as everything else that's going on within your ship. Today, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you can shut off half the stuff and it still flies and still does combat. But tomorrow, with the introduction of engineering, that power management is going to be critical. So what you're going to find is that you're going to have to be a lot more of an experienced pilot in order to fly those larger ships. Honestly, no judgment there. I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, I don't drive around in semi-trucks without extra training today, even though I theoretically could. It doesn't make sense for just a brand new player jump into those larger solo ships. I actually like the way that plays out. I think engineering is actually solving a lot of problems in this regard. Now, let's take a look at those large capital-sized ships. Let's say kind of the Perseus and above, if you will. So for this, I'm kind of drawing the category of, let's say, a Perseus and above. So the Perseus, the Polaris, the Idris, and whatever else comes down the line. Now, there are several ships that kind of walk the line, but you use your best judgment on where those actually lie. Now, these are ships that are absolutely not meant to be piloted solo, but as I mentioned earlier, to me, they're honestly marketed to the solo player, so why shouldn't you be able to fly them solo? I can't buy a ship as an organization, I buy it as an individual. So to me, I should be able to fly, in some capacity, every ship that you are selling and marketing to me. That's just my stance. Okay? Let's jump into that, because I don't see this as a problem. So I use the Polaris. I'll use that as my example because it's by far the ship that I'm the most familiar with. So the Polaris has this big, giant engineering room that looks beautiful. I walked through it once and I've never been there since. There's really no point for anybody to visit that today, other than for some fancy screenshots, quite honestly. With the introduction of engineering, however, I do think that it's going to become critical to become very familiar with that area. Now, let's start with the day-to-day. Now, in the day-to-day, it's going to be incredibly important to maintain those components, because remember, with capital-sized components, you can't just swap them out. You can't keep spares on your ship. Believe it or not, you would actually have to go to a place and repair your ship. That becomes a very large undertaking. Now, you should be able to use multi-tools to actually repair these as they start to wear down. That's a good thing. But to me, I imagine the larger the ship, the faster the components actually break down. So it is going to become incredibly important, even if you just fly it as your daily driver, like I often do, to make sure that those components are being maintained. The last thing you want to do is be in the middle of a jump and have your quantum drive die. Now, outside of that, for your daily driving, I don't really see a super big or huge impact. I think you'll be able to fly around, do your cargo missions, do your bunkers, all of those things that I do with my Polaris today, outside of combat, of course. I don't see that you're going to have a major impact. You're still going to be able to do it. And in my personal opinion, I think that's fair. I don't see any reason why I shouldn't be able to fly my Polaris around by myself if all I'm doing is lugging around a couple hundred SCU of cargo. Am I utilizing the ship to its fullest capacity? No. But I know that, and I'm okay with that. Now, where it does become a lot more difficult as a solo player is really going to become when it comes to combat. I will fully well admit that the Polaris as a solo player is horribly overpowered today. It makes no sense to me that I can go to almost any bounty mission in the game, park my Polaris there, hop on a turret, and be perfectly fine. Parked. The PDCs take care of most of the threats. I'm in a turret to take care of the larger threats, or the ones the PDCs don't actually take out. And to me, it's honestly just incredibly overpowered. I can't even believe that they launched it this way. Now, going forward, I don't think that this is something that's going to be the same way. Going forward, I think it's going to be incredibly important to have at least one engineer probably multiple engineers on board in that same situation. Now, am I sad about that? Yeah, I mean, it was nice to solo and do any mission in the game and get the rewards for it. But I think it's absolutely fair, and I think it's absolutely understood. I think it absolutely makes sense that I shouldn't be able to be incredibly overpowered just because I have a bigger ship. I think I should need that crew. That's really the only impact that I see that's really going to kind of tick a lot of people off. Is in those larger capital-sized ships, and even slightly below capital. I keep using capital, but that's not even fair because the Polaris is a sub-capital ship. But in those larger ships that are designed for multi-members in your crew, with dedicated engineering rooms, you are definitely going to need an engineer or 2 or 3 to help maintain your ship on the fly. It is what it is. Now, do I wish I knew that when I bought my Polaris? Kind of. Would I still have bought it? Yes. But it's really no secret that CIG is all about the ship sales. They're trying to fund a game. They're trying to fund the development of their game. So it absolutely actually makes sense to me that they would be. Now, if you look at the impact of engineering, and I think that they timed these tech previews very well, the impact of engineering on ship sales, I think for the mass majority of people, they saw the footage that was leaked, and they're still okay buying ships like the Perseus as a solo player. I don't think they expect it to be all that difficult to fly that around by yourself. Now, I'll be honest, personally, it's actually put a real big damper on IAE because I'm starting to reevaluate my fleet. I'm looking at it and saying, well, are these ships actually going to be fun to fly around? I did not buy the Perseus. I love the way it looks. I love what it does. But honestly, with the introduction of engineering in a month, it's just not for me. So as I'm starting to look at my fleet, I'm starting to say, well, things like the Pioneer, is that actually something I'm going to be able to use? I don't know. Now, be your own judge. Now, again, I think they've actually broken records on their sales that they had this year, so clearly it hasn't made that big of an impact. But as an individual, I think that people are actually starting to question whether they should be buying these larger ships. Or does it make sense to actually wait and buy it as an organization in-game? So I really wonder the success they're going to see with things like the Kraken. Only time will tell. But I hope that all of these ships are actually viable in some capacity as an individual in the future, without combat. But personally, I'm going to wait and see. I'm not going to waste my money to find out I really can't utilize my ship in any capacity that I like in a month's time. Now the fun part. Let me know in the comments down below what you think the impact of engineering will be on your game style. Everybody's a little bit different here, so I want to hear from as many people as possible. Also, I'm curious, did it affect the choices that you made during IAE? I actually noticed that a lot of the ships they released do tend to be focused more on that solo player. So I think it's actually even impacting what they are choosing to release and develop. And I'm really curious to see what they release in the next year. Again, let me know in the comments below. This has been another video by Citizen Chaos, and I can't wait to see you in the verse.